Hey guys, welcome to another video, Purple Political Talk here, and today we're going to be looking at the latest 2020 presidential election forecast from the top three major 2020 presidential forecasters out there. So that would be the Economist forecast, the 538 forecast, and the JHK forecast. So we're going to look at all these forecasts, analyze what they have differently, and whether I think that's which forecast is the most accurate, and where do I think these forecasts stand when it comes to who's a little bit more right, who has calls that I would agree with, and all that. So before we get started, please remember to like, subscribe, and turn on post notifications to be up to date with our latest content. So let's get started. So first, we're going to take a look at the Economist forecast, which for many would say is one of the most biased forecasts out there. And recently we've seen a very big shift in this forecast. Over the last week, Donald Trump has gained 10% chance, where instead of being at 10%, he's now at 80% or 20% chance of winning, which again, it's still not a majority, but it's still a lot better. So now let's take a look and see what this forecast is saying. So at a nationwide level, they believe Joe Biden will still be the winner, and he would win not by a huge margin, but a margin that is somewhat closer to where a lot of people would have expected. So I think at this point, one of the most interesting calls I would say is Arizona in the likely in the toss-up column. And what do I think is interesting about this? I would say that a state like Florida is much more of a toss-up than a state of Arizona. Again, polling data from Florida has Biden ahead by 4, 5, 6%. However, in Arizona, we have a lot closer race, but the support for Biden is there. So what do I think happened in a lot of these states where the calls are a little different than maybe some of us expected? Well, I would just say, first of all, in the state of Arizona, we're starting to see some people start flipping from Biden to Trump, or people that were considering voting for Biden have solidified because of Trump. Again, nationwide, we have the riots have really affected this race. In the Sunbelt, COVID-19 has started to somewhat improve. Again, we're not fully recovered, and we won't be for 2 or 3 years. However, we started to see some of the early impacts of COVID-19 and how we've gotten or try to come back. So I think, like, honestly, at this point in time, the state of Arizona probably falls more in the lean Democratic column. But again, they're bringing a little bit, I guess, cautious with how they call these races. Right now, they do believe that Joe Biden still does have a substantial chance of victory, 65%. However, I would say that this race falls a little bit more towards the left. And I mean, the other races that we're seeing pretty close. Florida 60 or Georgia 61% for Donald Trump victory. That is a substantial margin at this point. That a lot of forecasts have it a little bit less for Donald Trump. Others think it's going to be within 50 in the 50s when it comes to percent chance. Which again, 50 if you're in the 50s within percent chance, it's absolutely nothing. It's going to be a narrow race. So I think that's another interesting race that we're seeing here. Georgia, I think honestly Donald Trump's probably going to win here. The margins will narrow down as you have areas like Atlanta, as you have areas like the suburbs of Atlanta, Macon, and all these different areas that are truly going to have to make a decision. And with Donald Trump appealing more to minorities than ever before, at least in modern Republican history, I would say that it's going to be somewhat easier for him to carry some of these southern states. So, I mean, when I say minorities, I mean, I think we've seen a big increase amongst Latino support for Donald Trump. Again, and also a lot of more African-American support. Some recent polling data from polls that they only ask Hispanics and Latinos only showed Donald Trump behind with Latinos by 20 points, which is not a lot considering like how big these races go usually for the Democrats. Of course, there could be lower numbers and things like that, but still 20 to 30 points considering margin of error and things like that behind Donald Trump. And then the amongst African Americans, Donald Trump has not doubled, but almost like doubled and a half his growth among support in that community, which really is going to help him in states like North Carolina or Georgia, where it's going to be crucial for him to win the African American vote. at least, or a bigger amount of it, to take away from votes from the Democrats and be able to have a bigger victory. So, I mean, a lot of these states, they're moving further into the safer columns, and for a good reason. Donald Trump has been able to appeal to these voters. And over the last week, the Biden campaign has had a very, very hard time. Other calls that by this forecast that I would say are somewhat interesting, they call Nevada as lean. I would kind of agree with that. It's not completely, I would say, in the safe column yet, but I would say it's probably not as close as a state like Wisconsin or a state like Michigan or a state like Pennsylvania, which in this case, they believe that Nevada will be somewhat a lot closer than these states in the Rust Belt, where realistically, it shouldn't be that way, because here we have almost an 85% chance of victory. Here we have 82. So almost the same, 5 and 6, 77%. So we have almost a near the same chance of Biden winning in Nevada than in the Rust Belt, which is interesting. Now, he has definitely been hit in the Rust Belt. So I think, honestly, the Trump campaign, they have a couple paths to the presidency. But for them, it's going to be crucial to win the Rust Belt, or at least some combination of the Rust Belt. So this is the first forecast we looked at. And honestly, there's a lot of interesting calls. And the last call I wanted to talk about was the state of North Carolina, which at this point also has a quite interesting call, as they currently have pretty much split down the middle with Joe Biden narrowly favored to win. We have some recent poll here that show pretty tight race. Again, if Donald Trump's actually able to bring up those numbers amongst African Americans, which some polls have showed that he has, at least at some extent, honestly, it should be a very close race, and Donald Trump could even win there. So that was the Economist forecast. And now I want to move on to the JHK forecast. So I think at this point, the JHK forecast is truly an interesting forecast. And I would say that is one of the ones that probably has the best presentation. And when it comes to being correct, in the past, they got the 2018 House races almost like completely correct, which is pretty interesting. They obviously got some wrong because, of course, there's no way to get everything right. But I will now show you the screen for the JHK forecast, and we're gonna talk about the differences that really impact the election. At this point, this map is somewhat more encouraging for the president, as I think at this point in time, there's a lot more states that the Democrats need to somewhat hold on to, because a lot of these states are becoming more and more tipping points, as they call them on this forecast, which essentially is what they call swing states. So honestly, at this point, the Democrats, according to this forecast, they should start defending Nevada, Colorado, and Virginia, 2 states, or 3 states actually, where they really didn't have to defend before. That's going to be an interesting task for them, as they thought they probably had pretty good margins there. Of course, they're still heavily favored to win. However, that's going to be 3 more states they will need to focus on. And as we can see here, Donald Trump went from having a 13% chance a mere a month ago. Now he's at 20% chance, which in these forecasts, once you go down, it's hard to come back up. And where are we seeing what states are becoming more solid for him, and where are we seeing this change? Well, essentially is that we have some states that before were super split down the middle that we didn't know what was going to happen. Those states have now moved on to be a little bit further into the Republican column, as well as states like Nevada, Colorado, and Virginia, and as well as Arizona and parts of the Rust Belt, which have started to narrow down. I mean, at this point, the Rust Belt is still pretty solid, I would guess, for Joe Biden, according to the forecast. They have pretty similar numbers kind of in all the places. But I think, like, honestly, I think at this point, the Rust Belt is an area where Biden's going to start defending. And honestly, if Biden keeps on slipping in the Rust Belt like he has recently, then that might be a problem for him, because he honestly is going to have to defend the Rust Belt. Where would I say this forecast goes a little bit wrong? I would say Florida is narrowly in the Trump column, and North Carolina is debatable, I guess. It's going to be, according to this, the closest state. It's not that close. I would say that North Carolina is a very interesting state. I would put it maybe narrowly in the Biden column, but again, if Donald Trump is able to increase the African American support like he has as of recent times, I would not be surprised if he could pull off a victory here. I mean, generally speaking, these 2 forecasts are pretty similar. Give Donald Trump about a 20% chance. And I think, honestly, this forecast is probably somewhat accurate. I would say, again, those two things that I kind of disagree with. However, I mean, they're also basing it off polling averages where the Democrats are skyrocketing in some of these states like Florida, which, again, I find a little surprising because here on the ground in Florida, I see a lot more Trump support. That could be many things, like Biden supporters are just not as enthusiastic or things like that. But however you look at it, that's going to be somewhat of a problem for Joe Biden, because if people are not pushed to go out and vote for Joe Biden, they will not do so at all. So it's going to be something interesting to watch when it comes to the JHK forecast. So now we're going to look at the last forecast in this video, which is the 538 forecast. And again, a lot of people really like this forecast because a lot of people for a lot of people, it's the most unbiased and the most fair forecast of them all. So I will now share the screen and show you guys the forecast. And they don't really have a map. However, they do have this snake, which kind of represents the map a little bit, where well, the bigger the state is lengthwise, that means the more the more electoral votes they have, and depending on the shade, whether it be on the edges. So the darker red is states that are pretty much safe red, and then the darker blue are states that are, or federal district in this case of DC, that are safe blue. However, when you look at things in the middle, the map doesn't look too bad for Donald Trump. And it has definitely in this forecast they actually put Donald Trump somewhat a little bit less, I guess. Because he was leading by he was getting a lot more, like maybe a couple points more last time we did a forecast. However, I mean, this map, if you look at the states that Donald Trump needs to win, I know the ones they say are like closer to being at the edge. So North Carolina, Florida, Nebraska second, Arizona and Pennsylvania does the deed. I think, honestly, it's not going to be impossible for him to win there. It's going to be tough, however. I think, honestly, this forecast probably shows, I think it's pretty similar to the JHK forecast. However, again, like I've been saying, I kind of disagree with the calls in North Carolina and Florida just because of data that we have amongst minorities, which I think, honestly, the Democrats are running a campaign for the working class voters, especially the white working class in the Midwest. Again, in those states, that's definitely going to like really help them because that's the only places they've been visiting. However, when you start looking at key states like Arizona and key states like Florida, the Democrats are not running many events here, which might really hurt them long term. And realistically, the reason why Donald Trump is starting to go up in a lot of these forecasts, it's questionable. We don't really know. It could be a bunch of different things because, again, right now we're dealing with 10 million things when it comes to politics. We have, for example, the Donald Trump and his handling of COVID-19, the riots and all of that getting kind of gone through. We have some states where there's still riots, like in Portland. We have a lot of big political dramas going on right now, which honestly is going to be kind of a deciding factor. And it's this last month, I guess, before the debates, where we're going to start to see a lot of the policies and straight up. One thing that I haven't seen from Joe Biden, which, again, I think a lot of voters might think the same, they're not seeing too many plans from him. Usually when you run a campaign, you run on policy, but I guess he's trying to run more a campaign just against Trump. I mean, it's fine. It's politics. However, for the American voters, especially those voters, the minorities and the voters in the Rust Belt, a lot of them want policies. Yeah, Biden has given some policies, but it's not many. So I think, honestly, that's something the Biden campaign needs to definitely look into to try to get their margins up. So, I mean, these forecasts are all similar, yet different in many different ways. However, one thing we can know right now is Biden is leading the election, but Trump is catching up. I would not count Donald Trump out at this point just because of the fact that he is the type of politician that does a very good right at the end. 2016 is a great example. Again, we're not running with the same conditions as 2016, but his campaigning style seems to be paying off, especially amongst some suburban Americans. So honestly, at this point, this election is really up in the air. Donald Trump is making it very close. And honestly, the next month and a half is going to be a very big deciding factor leading up to the last 2 weeks, which honestly is going to be pretty much all mail-in voting. because everyone wants to vote early, I guess, because there's not going to be in-person polling places, or there's going to be a lack of. So a lot of these people are going to be voting within the next month. So honestly, these last days are crucial to what happens in the election. So I hope you enjoyed the video. So please give it a huge thumbs up, like, subscribe, and turn on post notifications to be up to date with our latest content. Hope you enjoyed the video, and goodbye.